Before we begin today's story, I want you to close your eyes for just 5 seconds. Go ahead. Close them. Now imagine this. You open them, and everything is gone. Not dim, not blurry. Gone. Complete darkness. Forever. That was the moment that changed Emmanuel Osei's life. Not slowly, not with warning, but all at once, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in the summer of his 32nd year. Emmanuel had always been a baker. Not the kind who does it for money or fame. The kind who does it because flour between his fingers felt like breathing. He had learned the craft from his grandmother, a small, sharp-eyed woman in the Ashanti region of Ghana who believed that bread was not food. It was a message, a way of telling someone, I thought of you. I made something with my hands so your day could be sweeter. By the time Emmanuel was in his 20s, he had moved to the city, opened a small shop with peeling paint on the sign and mismatched chairs inside, and built a loyal circle of customers who came not just for the pastries but for him. His laugh, his habit of giving away extra rolls to children who pressed their noses to the glass, his way of making every person who walked through the door feel like the most important customer he had ever served. Life was not perfect, but it was his, and he was grateful. Then one morning, while lifting a heavy tray from the top shelf of his storeroom, Emmanuel lost his footing. The fall lasted less than 2 seconds. The recovery lasted the rest of his life. He struck the back of his head on the corner of the steel rack. The damage to his optic nerve was severe, immediate, and, the doctors told him quietly, with careful eyes and careful words, permanent. Emmanuel lay in that hospital bed for 11 days. He did not cry, not right away. At first, he simply could not believe it. He kept thinking the darkness was temporary, like waking up in the night and waiting for your eyes to adjust. He kept waiting for something to adjust. Nothing adjusted. On the 5th day, a nurse came to check on him and asked how he was feeling. Emmanuel told her he was fine. She asked if he needed anything. He thought for a long moment and said, very quietly, I want to smell something baking. She looked at him strangely. But the next morning, she brought a small loaf of bread from the canteen downstairs, still warm, wrapped in a cloth napkin. She placed it in his hands without saying a word. Emmanuel held it against his chest. And for the first time since the accident, he cried. Not because of the darkness, not because of what he had lost, but because even blind, even broken, even lost in the most terrifying silence of his life, the smell of fresh bread still felt like home. He was discharged from the hospital 11 days after the accident. His sister, Abina, came to collect him. She had already made plans for him to stay with her family. She had already spoken to someone about programs for the visually impaired. She had already cried privately so she could be strong in front of him. Emmanuel sat in the passenger seat of her car as they drove away from the hospital. He could hear the city around him, horns honking, a woman selling oranges calling out her price, children playing somewhere distant, and he realized, with a strange clarity, that he had never truly listened to any of it before. What do you want to do? Abina asked him as they pulled into her compound. Emmanuel sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, I want to bake. She paused. Emmanuel, I know, he said, but I want to bake. And that was the end of the conversation, and the beginning of everything else. People who knew Emmanuel expected him to grieve for months, maybe years. They expected him to be angry, to retreat, to become someone smaller. Some people do that after loss, and no one would have blamed him. But Emmanuel had learned something from his grandmother that most people spend their whole lives trying to understand. The hands remember what the eyes forget. He had baked thousands of loaves, rolled hundreds of pastries, shaped dough in the dark of early mornings when the sun had not yet come up and the kitchen was lit only by the weak bulb above the oven. He had done it by feel more times than he knew. Maybe, he thought, blindness was not the end of baking. Maybe it was just a different kind of morning. He started small, very small. Back in Abina's kitchen, with her standing nervously at the doorway, Emmanuel ran his fingers across the counter. He found the edge, found the bowl, found the bag of flour he had asked her to leave in the same spot every day. He spilled flour the first time, knocked the bowl the second time, burned his hand on the third attempt because he misjudged the oven rack. He did not stop. He developed a system. Every ingredient had a position. Every tool had a place. He counted his steps from the counter to the oven. 4 steps, turn right, 2 steps to the handle. He began to measure not just by cup, but by sound. The way flour fell differently from sugar when poured into a metal bowl. the way butter sizzled at the exact right moment when the pan was ready. He learned to tell the temperature of dough by pressing his palm gently against it. He learned to know when bread was done not by looking at the color, but by the sound it made when he tapped it. A hollow knock, deep and certain, like a door being answered. 6 weeks after the accident, Emmanuel produced a perfect loaf of honey oat bread in his sister's kitchen. Abina sliced it, tasted it, set down the knife. "This," she said, her voice catching, "is exactly the same as always." Emmanuel smiled, the first full smile anyone had seen on his face since the fall. "I told you," he said. "The hands remember." But this is only where the story begins. Because baking one loaf in your sister's kitchen is one thing. What Emmanuel was about to attempt, what he was slowly building toward in the quiet determination of those early weeks, that was something else entirely. He was not baking to survive. He was baking to go back. Word travels fast in a community, and in the neighborhood where Emmanuel had run his bakery for nearly 8 years, the word that traveled fastest was this. He was trying to reopen. The reactions were mixed. His friends said it with warmth but firm eyes. "Emmanuel, take time to rest. There is no rush. You have been through something terrible." His customers, the ones who had loved him, said it with sadness dressed up as concern. A blind baker? How would that even work? A few people said nothing, but their silence was louder than the rest. It was the silence of people who had already decided the story was over. Only Abina said nothing discouraging. She simply asked, "What do you need?" Emmanuel had a list. He needed the bakery reorganized. Every surface, every shelf, every drawer had to be in a fixed and permanent position. Nothing could be moved without telling him first, because in a sighted kitchen, a misplaced knife is an inconvenience. In his kitchen, a misplaced knife was a crisis. He needed tactile labels on every container, small raised stickers in different shapes that his fingers could read the way eyes read letters. A circle for sugar, a square for salt, a triangle for baking soda. He designed the system himself, lying awake at night thinking it through, turning the problem over and over until it became a solution. He needed a trusted person beside him in the beginning, not to bake for him, but to tell him when something was about to go wrong before it went wrong. Eyes he could borrow when his own failed. He chose a young man from the neighborhood named Kofi, 17 years old, serious and quiet, who had once worked part-time washing dishes in the bakery. Kofi did not talk too much. Emmanuel liked that. And he needed time. More time than he had before, because everything that once took him 10 minutes now took 40. Every recipe he had memorized in his muscles had to be rememorized in his fingertips, his nose, his ears, his tongue. He was not starting over, but he was learning a new language for something he already knew. The first week back in the bakery was humbling. He burned 2 batches of rolls, undersalted a tray of meat pies so badly that Kofi made a face and said, diplomatically, "They are interesting." He dropped an entire bowl of batter on the floor and stood in the silence afterward, breathing slowly, the batter cooling around his feet, deciding whether to laugh or scream. He laughed. "Clean it up," he told Kofi, "and bring me another bowl." That was Emmanuel. That had always been Emmanuel. The kind of man who, when the batter hits the floor, asks for another bowl. By the 3rd week, things began to shift. His senses, freed from the dominance of sight, began to sharpen in ways that surprised even him. He started to notice things he had never noticed before. The way the yeast smelled different on a humid morning versus a dry one, and how that meant adjusting the water temperature slightly. The way dough felt different depending on the quality of the flour, and how a slightly sticky texture that looked the same could feel entirely different under his hands. The way the oven, his old oven, the one he had used for 8 years, made a sound 2 minutes before it reached the right temperature, a small click and a hiss that he had never registered before because he had always just looked at the dial. He was becoming a better baker, not despite the blindness. Because of it. This is the thing that nobody tells you about losing something. Sometimes what you lose in one place, you find in another. Emmanuel had lost his sight, and he needed time. More time than he had before, because everything that once took him 10 minutes now took 40. Every recipe he had memorized in his muscles had to be rememorized in his fingertips, his nose, his ears, his tongue. He was not starting over, but he was learning a new language for something he already knew. The first week back in the bakery was humbling. He burned 2 batches of rolls, Undersalted a tray of meat pies so badly that Kofi made a face and said, diplomatically, "They are interesting." He dropped an entire